So in this video, I want to talk about F-16s, and I want to be very clear about F-16s. They're not the end all and be all, but they are very important. This is about a week ago, a little less than a week ago. Romania stepped up and said it would take part in its training programs. You saw this video or this article today. Ukraine gets the fighter jets it coveted, but F-16s will it come too late for the counteroffensive? Now, just a couple of days ago, I was looking at an article it was either RT or Pravda. I can't find it now, but they were saying, Ukraine's only getting 6 jets. What are they going to do with 6 jets? Well, it's not actually 6. It's actually quite a bit more than that. This is Anton Gerashenko. Before I show you Gerashenko's, there was this I saw. Ukraine will receive 61 F-16 fighter jets, 42 from the Netherlands, 19 from Denmark. Be careful when you watch stuff on Twitter. If you look at something like this, it's up to 42 from the Netherlands. We don't know exactly how many of those are going to come, so you want to be careful and verify with good sources. But some are just really good sources, like Anton Gerashenko. Now, he's also making the case here that it's not going to be a game changer immediately. It's going to have more of a long-term than a short-term effect. I'm going to read a little bit. It was always obvious that sooner or later Ukraine would receive Western fighter jets, in the same way that sooner or later they would receive tanks and artillery and other red lines that got crossed over time. Just as the Ukrainian armed forces are transitioning from Soviet artillery, gradually replacing it with NATO calibers, so too will the Ukrainian Air Force. Many people are focusing their attention on discussing the short-term effect, whether the F-16s can help the Ukrainian armed forces in the counteroffensive. What Ukraine needs right now to succeed in a continued uninterrupted supply is a continued uninterrupted supply of artillery shells. The F-16s won't be able to immediately perform all the functions they theoretically can. Many of them are much more complex than others. For example, shooting down Russian cruise missiles is a relatively simple task, but performing ground force support missions is much more complex. It requires much more training and coordination. Therefore, politicians need to look at the issue of fighter jets for Ukraine from two sides. The short term, it's assistance with defense of Ukrainian cities from missile attacks, and in the long term, it's about creating a powerful Ukrainian armed forces air force. For such a large country as Ukraine, it's normal to have a powerful air force with 200 to 300 combat airplanes. Well, it begs the question, why didn't they have it? Well, because they had security guarantees from the Budapest Memorandum forward by the United States, UK, and Russia that their borders would be secured if they gave up their nukes. That's why they don't have them. And so it is kind of on us to make sure that we give them what they need. The positive side of the long-term plan is that it will be useful regardless of whether the war ends sooner or later. Now, he talks about a video from Anders Puck-Nielsen, and he has it here. I'm going to show you just a little clip about it, where Anders, who's in the Danish military, he is talking about like the effect of it short term and long term. And I just want to give you a short little clip, and then we're going to look at a couple other things, including how RT is presenting this.
That these countries also intend to donate some aircraft after the training is over. And now that transfer of F-16s to Ukraine has apparently been approved by the United States, so that can take place. But the more important thing to understand here is that building a new air force is a huge thing. Like, it's a long-term investment. There have been many discussions about whether it is a good idea to give fighter aircraft to Ukraine and if it would make a difference in the current counteroffensive and these things. But I think to some extent, this misses the point. I think Ukraine would be able to use F-16s for some tasks very quickly. Like, for example, it's pretty simple to shoot down incoming cruise missiles that are heading for Ukrainian cities. So if Ukraine gets F-16, then they can very quickly use them to improve the air defense of the country. It's much more difficult to use fighter aircraft, for example, for close air support on the front line. Like, this will require a much stronger force and much more training and integration. So there are different tasks, and some of them require more than others. So yes, I do think that if Denmark and the Netherlands provide, let's say, a few handfuls of F-16s, then that will make a real difference right away.
Now, I want to add something. It's not just Denmark and the Netherlands and the United States but there's going to be more coming to the party here. So that's important to understand. So however many from Denmark, however many from the Netherlands, and then you have things like Greece just announced, this was a couple hours ago, just announced it will join the International F-16 Coalition for Ukraine by training pilots. And other countries will either train and or supply more F-16. So the party's going to grow, just like it did with tanks. Okay, a little bit more from Anders, and then we'll switch over to RT.
It will help defend Ukrainian cities against cruise missiles. But it will not immediately give Ukraine air superiority on the front line. Like, that would require more. And that's where I think it's important to keep the long perspective in mind. If for a moment we put the war aside and we look at what kind of air force would it actually make sense for Ukraine to have in peacetime, then I think for a country the size of Ukraine and with the location they have, like, it would make sense for them to have a pretty big air force, like maybe 200 or 300 aircraft.
That's right. And so what he said was, in the short run, it's not going to have an effect like right now in the current counteroffensive, but in the long run, they're going to be well supplied in order to be able to keep Russia at bay. Okay, now speaking of Russia, let's look at how RT has said what they said. This is 2 days ago. So some things have already passed. This was before the Netherlands and Denmark actually decided that they were going to give it. But let's hear what RT had to say. Listen to what the commentator is trying to cause you to think. That's how I want you to process this. Why are they saying what they're saying? What do they want us to believe? Okay, so listen for that carefully.
Even as Ukraine's long-awaited, much hyped but failed counteroffensive grinds to a bloody and costly halt, it seems that some delusionists in the West still believe that the F-16, an American fighter jet that first took to the skies nearly 50 years ago, can somehow save the day for Zelensky.
Okay, the counteroffensive failed, and it's not going to work, and this old machine is just not going to get you there. You ought to quit. You ought to give up now. That's kind of where he's going with this.
NATO handlers. But it seems that even the Western media, who've thus far played such a pivotal role in overhyping Kiev's military capabilities, are less than convinced that this aging American cast-off can play anything close to a defining role in NATO's failing proxy war against Russia in Ukraine.
If that's the case, why is he worried about it? That's the real question. Why wouldn't he just let it go? I mean, like, if you don't believe in a tooth fairy, why would you rail against a tooth fairy?
F-16s are about our long-term commitment to Ukraine and are a capability that won't be relevant to the current counteroffensive.
And where there was once supreme, almost absolute confidence that Ukraine's heroic warriors would easily cast out the barbarous Russian invaders, now even the head of Ukraine's decimated air force seems to accept that talk is cheap, especially when it comes to promises of yet another game changer, particularly when the previous long line of game changers have proven to be anything but, changing only one thing: the length of the war and the number of Ukrainian men and boys doomed to die fighting it.
So nothing's going to change. You're not actually going to win this war. You're just going to prolong the pain. You ought to give up now. Pretty sure that Ukrainians are not going to think along those paths, but that's what he wants the West to understand or believe or accept.
Unfortunately, it is already clear that we will not be able to protect Ukraine with F-16s throughout the fall and this winter. There were high hopes for these aircraft, that they could really become part of the air defense. But as it happens, the issue has shifted. We realize that our pilots will soon be training in the air coalition countries that support us. But at the same time, our air defenses need to be strengthened.
In reality, the F-16 is unlikely to ever see service in the skies over Ukraine. While the NATO architects of this conflict are, of course, eager to dangle the carrot of their deployment, no partner countries have actually committed to handing them over.
Well, joke's on you. They just did over the last 2 days. So, yes, this was 2 days ago. He's saying, well, it's not going to happen anyway, or it's not going to work, or they're 50 years old. He keeps saying these kinds of things as if saying it makes it true. But look what he's trying to do. He's trying to project, this isn't going to help you anyway, so why even do it? It's an interesting way, if you think about it, for him to show his fear of F-16s.
There are massive logistical issues that would need to be ironed out before they could even land in the nation. And forget about even taking off. Ukraine's dilapidated infrastructure can't accommodate them, and they've no training facilities. And as of today, only a handful of Ukrainian pilots are even candidates to begin the lengthy and complex training process to fly them.
He's worried about the training facilities, but Romania was saying they're going to do it. Greece just stepped up and said they would do it. So they'll work that out. I don't think the Ukrainians are terribly worried about these kind of problems. They'll get it sorted out.
Ukraine has sent the U.S. a list of 32 pilots it says are ready for training, but the official said only 8 have the English language skills to complete the course. The other 24 must go through an English language instruction program run by the United Kingdom before they can start training on the jets.
While it now seems absolutely obvious that the provision of F-16s to Ukraine is now nothing more than a far-off mirage, many see the jet in the context in which it actually belongs.
But does it seem like a mirage? Because it looks like it's really coming together, and we're getting jets, we're getting training. I don't see it as a mirage.
Simply another NATO cast-off, eagerly dumped into Ukraine on the promise of high-tech replacements by Uncle Sam. But given the dire performance of Western tech on the battlefield so far, it'll be no surprise to anyone if the US ultimately cans the entire project.
The only result of the Ukrainian counteroffensive that even the West has been forced to recognize is tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers killed and hundreds of units of expensive Western equipment destroyed, which, as the whole world has been able to see, is not only not unique and invulnerable to Russian weapons, but in many cases inferior even to Soviet-made models from 50 years ago.
Well, we're about to find that out, aren't we? We're about to find out just how inferior F-16s actually perform when they go up against Russian planes or other Russian weapons.
So, as the Western architects of this catastrophic conflict in Ukraine finally begin to accept that this all only ends one way, they'll probably string Ukraine along as long as possible when it comes to the elusive F-16, just like they've done with their promises of EU and NATO membership. And let's not forget, it was those very same promises that set Ukraine on the pathway to this devastating war with Russia, a conflict only the very foolish could believe will be won with a handful of nearly 50-year-old fighter jets.
So only the foolish will believe this, and they have to come to terms with the idea that it'll only go one way. Look what he's projecting, right? There's a reason that he's saying what he's saying, and that's showing his fear of the F-16s. All right, last little bit. This I saw on Twitter, and I thought, this is wonderful. Look at this is the aircraft graveyard, the world's largest aircraft warehouse in Arizona. More than 4,400 planes are parked there. Some of the aircraft are scrapped, but the earliest modifications of the F-16, F-15, and F-16 are not touched. By the way, after minor repairs, they can fly again. There's going to be plenty to go around. Now, I think that F-16s are going to be a game changer, but not yet. They're going to be late to the party in the same way that armor was late to the party. And that's because Putin has done a good deal of work in deterring the West. But it's just a matter of time. I have not accepted that it's only going to end one way, or at least not that way. It'll end the other way, in my estimation. Okay, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience with me. And thank you for listening to this, as painful as that guy is. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. I'll be back tomorrow. I hope you will be too.